Fear of death or thanatophobia. People may be afraid of death and do not experience a good feeling by thinking about death, that this not so good feeling about death is a natural thing, because man always wants to live and be alive. The feeling of fear of losing life and death is something that can sometimes occupy people's minds and cause stress in them. Fear of death in psychology is an example of the types of phobias in which people have a lot of mental preoccupation with the feeling of death and are afraid of dying. People with thanatophobia think excessively about death and losing their lives. In this situation, they may experience a lot of sensitivity towards themselves, which causes them to have problems in their daily functioning. In this article, we have talked about the fear of death, its symptoms, causes, and treatment solutions. What is the fear of death? Thanatophobia, or fear of death, is a type of panic disorder or phobia that involves an intense fear of death or the process of dying. Some people may also call thanatophobia death anxiety. Fear of death can lead to experiencing feelings of intense anxiety about one's own sudden death or experiencing the process of dying. The root of the word thanatophobia, which means fear of death, comes back to the Greek language, which in Greek means thanatos/thanatos meaning death and phobos meaning fear or fear. However, feeling some stress and anxiety about death and dying is a perfectly normal part of the human condition. Some people experience intense anxiety and fear when thinking about their own death or experiencing the process of dying. When faced with the fact that fear is inevitable, these people experience physical and psychological symptoms that indicate their intense fear of death. As this feeling of anxiety continues, their daily life is disrupted. In the most extreme form of reactions to the fear of death, people may stop doing daily activities or not leave the house at all to avoid dying and losing their lives and to reduce death anxiety. While the fear of death is normal, thanatophobia, or death anxiety, is so severe that it can cause panic attacks. What is a phobia? Phobia or panic disorder is one of the types of mental disorders mentioned in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5. People with phobias experience an abnormal, intense, and morbid fear of animals, heights, blood, or death. What is death anxiety? Death anxiety refers to a state in which people are consciously aware of their own mortality. In death anxiety, people face the feeling of anxiety that their death will finally come and they will die one day. Death anxiety is an existential and inherent fear in humans that accompanies them from birth. But what is the difference between death anxiety and fear of death? The difference between death anxiety and fear of death. People with fear of death have a strong fear about death and their mind has a strong conflict with death and loss of life. The fear of people in the fear of death is a sick, extreme and annoying fear. Fear of death disrupts the lives of affected people. But the anxiety of death is a fear accepted by humans, which does not disturb his life. Man in the anxiety of death knows that one day he will lose his life. What is the difference between thanatophobia and necrophobia? Thanatophobia is different from necrophobia. People with necrophobia fear dead things such as corpses or places where dead things are present, such as cemeteries. But thanatophobia is the fear of losing life and death. They become sensitive to anything that may cause them to die, and most of their mental conflict revolves around dying. What are the symptoms of fear of death? People with thanatophobia will preoccupy with thoughts of death that cause intense feelings of panic, anxiety, fear, or depression. People with thanatophobia may avoid places or situations that seem dangerous and obsess about their health. Thanatophobia or death anxiety causes symptoms that can affect people's physical and mental health. Symptoms of fear of death can appear after encountering death through television programs, news of another person's death, reading an article about death. Symptoms of fear of death in people include shivering feeling, dizziness and lightheadedness, excessive sweating, heartbeat, nausea, shortness of breath, body trembling, stomach upset or indigestion, fear of losing control, a strong feeling of fear and helplessness, chest pain, headache, numbness or tingling sensation, dry mouth, ringing in the ears. Cause of fear of death. Fear of death or death anxiety can affect people for various reasons and affect their lives. By identifying the causes of fear of death or thanatophobia, a better step can be taken to help people with fear of death. Different causes of fear of death in people can be the following. Trauma. Thanatophobia or fear of death can be caused by experiencing a severe and unbearable stressful event, such as a severe personal injury, witnessing the death of a parent or a loved one. These cases cause a trauma and can increase the possibility of a person suffering from the fear of death. Environment. Children who grow up with anxious, conservative, or over-reprimanding parents are more likely to develop thanatophobia. Children are more vulnerable than others to anxiety, including specific phobias. As a result, they are more likely to have a fear of death against things like thinking about death and dying. History of abuse. People who have been sexually, physically or emotionally abused in their lifetime are more likely to have a fear of death. Due to their mental vulnerability, these people are more sensitive to mental injuries than others and may experience a strong fear of death when faced with the issue of death. Death of a family member. Fear of death or thanatophobia may occur after experiencing the death of a parent or sibling. People who have witnessed the death and loss of a loved one are highly vulnerable to the fear of death because they may have thought about death and the dying process for a long time. Aging and fear of death. Thanatophobia, or the fear of death, often occurs in middle-aged people, as older people begin to experience the death of their friends and family. Hearing the news of the death of loved ones, and especially peers, makes them think more and more about death and the time of losing their lives. For this reason, the possibility of death anxiety in elderly people increases. Chronic disease. One of the causes of thanatophobia is people suffering from chronic diseases such as cancer or advanced chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, especially if the disease is incurable. People suffering from serious and chronic diseases are more likely to suffer from thanatophobia or fear of death.